Hello everyone, my name is Nur Zarifah Ismail from Climate Analysis Division. Have you seen this report before? This is Malaysia's third national communication and second biennial update report that we have submitted to the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change in September 2018. Our team have reviewed the National Greenhouse Gas Inventory, which described the historical emissions in Malaysia and what's the current emissions in 2014. Here, we are sharing the dissection of emissions for Malaysia.
The topic is Dissecting Malaysia Greenhouse Gas Emissions. Malaysia emitted 317,626 gigagram of carbon dioxide equivalent in 2014. The energy sector remains the largest contributor to the overall emissions at 80% of the total. The energy sector generates emissions from stationary sources, mobile sources, and fugitive sources. For example, emissions from electricity generations, road transport, and oil and gas production. The remaining 20% were from waste sector at 9%, industrial processes and product use sector at 6%, agriculture sector at 4%, and land use change and forestry at 1%. For LULUCF, the emissions was solely from forest land converted to the settlement. Under the energy sector, in the pie chart, the energy industries is clearly the largest emitter of greenhouse gas, being responsible for half of the emissions in the energy sector. Under the energy industry, 74% of the emissions was from main activity electricity and heat production, 19% from the manufacture of solid fuels and other energy industries, and 6% from petroleum refining. The key highlight here is solid fuels contributes to more than 50% of the total emissions in electricity generation. As you are aware, in Malaysia, most of the electricity generation is from coal. You can reduce the emissions by shifting to more cleaner energy sources, which includes hydropower, solar, biomass, and biogas. The second largest emissions after energy industries was transport subsector. From the total emissions, the road transport contributes to 88% of the total emissions. The third largest sources of emissions was fugitive emissions. It comprises of fugitive emissions from solid fuel and fugitive emissions from oil and gas. More than 90% of the fugitive emissions was mainly contributed by natural gas. Next is manufacturing industries and constructions, which contributes to 9% of the emissions. This subsector includes emissions from combustion of fuels in industry and combustion for the generation of electricity and heat for own use in these industries. As we can see here, natural gas was the main fuel used in manufacturing industries, which contribute to 50% of the emissions. Next is industrial processes and product use IPPU. What's the difference between the emissions from industries in the energy sector and IPPU? IPPU covers greenhouse gas emissions occurring from industrial processes, from the use of greenhouse gases in products, from non-energy users of fossil fuel carbon. But emissions from fuel combustion in industrial sector for energy purposes will be reported under energy sector. The mineral industry contributed to the highest emissions in IPPU. The main contribution of emissions by the mineral industry was from the cement production. Chemical industry contributed to 21% of the emissions. Petrochemical and carbon black production was the main contributor of emissions under the chemical industry at 75%, followed by ammonia production and carbide production. The third largest emissions under IPPU sector was metal industry. The emissions from the metal industry were mainly from the aluminium production at 58% and iron and steel production at 42%. Under the electronic industry, there were integrated circuit and semiconductor and photovoltaics. The integrated circuit and semiconductor was the main contributor, 76% of emissions under the electronic industry. The major emissions in the waste sector were from wastewater treatment and discharge and solid waste disposal. Under the wastewater treatment and discharge emissions, 89% of the emissions was from industrial wastewater. The main source of the emissions from the industrial wastewater was from palm oil mill effluent. Whereas The emissions from solid waste disposal are coming from the unmanaged waste contributes to 95% of emissions from solid waste disposal. The largest source of emissions in the agriculture sector was from direct nitrous oxide emissions from managed agriculture soils. More than 60% of the emissions was contributed by the utilization of inorganic nitrogen fertilizer on the cropland. Rice cultivations was the second largest sources of emissions in the agriculture sector. In Malaysia, we are practicing the traditional method for cultivating rice by flooding the fields, which will produce methane. Enteric fermentation was the third largest source of emissions in the agriculture sector. The photo on the right side shows how the enteric fermentation process happened in the ruminant digestive system. This table on the right side shows the key category analysis that have been conducted for greenhouse gas emissions for 2014 without LULUCF emissions. The key message here is we can prioritize the implementation of mitigation actions for 9 subsectors which contribute to 82% of total emissions. However, the list will be updated based on the results from the inventory exercise for year 2016. That's all for me. We hope you found this sharing session beneficial and useful. All the information on the emissions can be referred in this report, Malaysia's Third National Communication and Second Biennial Update Report. You may download it in this website as reflected in the screen. Thank you.